Welcome to the Finance meeting of January 24th, 2017. Yep.
It's moved by Councillor Morgan, seconded by Councillor Barker. The council approves the agenda for its finance meeting of January 24th, 2017 as presented.
All in favor? Unanimous, passed. We're going to start out with, is there any declaration of pecuniary interest? None declared. Any petitions or delegations? None. Reports of municipal officers and communication. Councillor Pat Kiley. We're going to start out with the preliminary financial status, the December 31st preliminary statements. There's still adjustments and other invoices that have to come out of this budget. I'd ask Jen to come up and maybe just go through the statements and highlight there's some significant variances, and provide any comments as well on that.
I'm not going to go overly in detail because we did just discuss the November one last meeting, I believe it was. And again, accounts payable don't close for December 2016 until February 10th. So there's lots of adjustments. There's union accruals that we need to account for because we've not all of our union contracts are up to date. So we've got lots of year-end movements on this. Just some significant things that we need to note. You'll notice like every line there's a transfer to working capital at zero, again because we need to wait until we've paid all of the bills to account for all of our capital projects. So after February 10th I'll make that movement. So when you look at the bottom line, right now we're showing about a $826,000 surplus. You need to take into account we still need to transfer $293,000 to working capital, and all of those levy for capitals add up to $294,000. So that brings your surplus in closer to around 238, of which there's those things that we need to do: union accruals, year-end movements, there's still some revenue that needs to be deferred until the next year, so that needs to come out. So more right now, the surplus is closer to 238 at this point in time. And the same thing with waterworks. There's still some bills to be paid, and we've been doing that waterworks reserve fund transfer quarterly. So the $100,000 has been taken into account already. So potentially there could be additional monies that are put into the waterworks reserve fund in 2016 fiscal year. Was there any questions on this right now?
Some of the highlights I'd just like to mention: Treasury's under budget about 19% for about $90,000.
That's because that's where the oh sorry, I have that on a different line. We do a lot of this year we did a lot of tax sale properties, and so when you get the money back from the courts, it could have been from tax sale properties years ago, but you're just getting it now. So that revenue is recorded in this particular year. And we also have interest income that will be taken out of there. It's to be deferred into future years for gas tax. Under our gas tax agreement, we have to record any interest that we've earned on funds, but we defer that into later years to add on to the gas tax projects.
Okay. Economic development is under about 65,000.
It's work that I did myself instead of hiring somebody to do. And then you also have in the museum, you see 28% is actually an error. There was some salary that was charged to Heritage North, not at the museum the way it was usually planned. So you actually would see a comparative it balances out between Heritage North and the museum.
Okay. Mark, maybe you can address this. Waste management is under 23%, 181,000.
I can address that
Or-
too.
Or
We
Jen?
discussed this at the last meeting. It was, because when we initially did the recycling budget, we passed the recycling budget in March.
That's right.
And anticipation that we were going to be hiring a different contractor. Well, we ended up keeping with our same recycling contractor, so it was much less than what we had anticipated in the budget.
Okay, that makes sense. The tax write-off's 946,371. That includes, a lot of that's the DVA. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. Payments in lieu, down about 91,000.
Yeah, so,
Is it just timing?
no, again, this was something that I brought up about the November one, and it wasn't clearly evident in the November one. However, with the sale of the Ontario Northland building, it was a PIL property, and that sale happened in July, so that means it's now a taxable property. So we didn't receive our full 100% of PILs, payment in lieu that we were anticipating at the beginning of the year. So I've never seen this before, but you'll notice on the taxes levied line, we actually levied $47,000 more in taxes, and that's because it transferred from a PIL to a commercial taxable property. So we're actually going to be receiving less taxes on that now that it's a commercial property instead of a PIL.
Okay, thanks, Jen. You might as well remain there as we go through. We'll go on to working capital.
Could I ask
Oh, sorry,
a question,
Tony.
please? Jen, I guess the question I'd like to know is, on the 2016 budget, our variance report here, I'd just like for you to point out to me where the cost of operating the sewage and where that,
It's on
what
your
line that is.
Second page,
Okay.
the second one from the top, sanitation.
So sanitation, that's just wastewater?
Yep.
So is it fair to say that this line,
Will not
If
be
we-
there
if
in
we-
2017.
okay, so right now, so it's $1.2 million, that's significant, isn't it? Okay, that's, because somehow we'll have to sort of quantify our, but we calculate our operating budget through this, our, and our, I should say, our tax levy.
Yes.
So by not having that line there in 2017, and if it was like it was this year in the amount of $1.2 million, then that should be significant savings.
Yep.
Because somehow we have to show the public how it ended up.
Oh, yeah.
And what a great way to show it. You know, in 2016, sanitation was this amount, and in 2017, it's zero. No, it doesn't help the taxpayer or the payer because their bill's just put on another bill, but it quantifies for us
Yep.
that it was
It was a transfer. Yep.
that's sanitation. Thank you.
In summary, Jen, just looking at this, we're in decent shape coming in to year end. We still could be surprises, but it's looking fairly close.
Yep.
Working capital, our present position, as you said, after adjustments is actually about 238,000. We budgeted an additional 300,000 in 2016. I think we all recognize that just puts a small dent in working, or improvement in working capital. And considering that our salary and benefit costs run about 1.1 million per month, what do you feel is a comfortable level? I know-
So just on the next page, we're showing what our reserves are sitting like.
Yep.
And our first line is our working capital. So we anticipated to put in 293,000, but through our capital budget, we're drawing down 370. So really, we're only putting in about, $80,000 this year. Or sorry, we're taking out more than we're putting in.
Yeah.
So it's really depleting our working capital. Generally, it would be nice to be close to the $1 million, but I mean, it fluctuates as well, right? We need to make sure that as a council, you're comfortable with the level of working capital to ensure that we can meet any of our financial needs. Like if there's any unforeseen expenses that come up. That's what our working capital is for, is to help shoulder those unforeseen expenses. So it is at its lowest position. The working capital is at its lowest position that I've seen in my 9 years that I've been here. So ideally, you know, we should at least put in, if we're gonna draw down $370,000 from it for capital works, we should at least put in that so that we're not depleting it every year. So we're trying to build it up, would be ideal. But again, we don't have a reserve policy like DSAB does, unfortunately, and I'm hesitant at this point in time to create one, because then that really sticks council to a level that you must put this much in, and in order for us to continue to work with the tax rates and how, you know, council wants to do that, it's difficult to offer tax decreases, yet also maintain that prescribed level that a policy would lay out for you.
Councillor,
It's my understanding, though, that any surplus at year end, which you say is right now standing around the 200,000 mark, goes into
Yep,
working capital.
it does.
So
Yes, it
there's a
does.
potential that we will actually,
There is a potential, but again, we are January 25th. We have 3 more weeks until accounts payable close, another 2.5 months until final audit. I am not being quoted on anything that our surplus is $200,000. Been here 9 years, long enough to know. I am not quoting it in January.
Mayor Tony?
Yeah, just with regards to capital, with regards to working capital reserve, by taking the sanitation out of the operating budget, we have already started to build and built in a reserve for our sanitation side through the,
Yep,
so that's positive. Whereas this year, we would use that capital to support that.
You're right.
So we are improving in that area a bit, which is, I think, a good step.
it is. And it also helps that we develop that 20-year operational and capital planning to outlay where we should be going in the next 20 years.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, Jan, that 3% is for an actual reserve fund, not just a reserve.
No, it's for a reserve fund. It will be cash in our
So it's not
bank.
going to be in the general operating account.
Nope.
So it's not going to change the working capital, really.
No, but we will have additional reserve fund money, whereas generally, if our sanitation operational costs had gone over budget, we would be drawing from our working capital. Whereas now, if our sanitation costs go over budget, it'll be drawing from that separate reserve fund.
Correct. Okay, that makes sense. We're talking about reserves and reserve accounts. The water reserve account's at 180, almost 183,000, which is, it's decent. The new pool drawdown, 1,047,908. Is that part of include the management at risk contract that was paid? Or has that been paid?
Well, this is just a combination of all the bills. So we council set aside that $2.1 million of insurance proceeds. And as our capital construction on the new aquatic center continues, we continue to deplete that $2.1 million. So it's a combination of construction costs, management costs, everything, costs that
date.
go into there.
Okay. Definitely, as Mayor Antoniazzi mentioned, the sewer reserve account, we're set for 2017. That's going to ensure ongoing maintenance and towards equipment replacement over the next 20 years. So that's something we haven't done in the past, and it's not that it's just long overdue, but it's the right way to do it. I'll let you elaborate a little bit on the preliminary budget update. I know we've looked at Councillor Barker and myself, and yourself and Nancy, we went through the 3 budgets, special constables, Treasury and Fire Department, presented their preliminary budgets. Tomorrow, we start, this week, we have 2 or 3 more each day, I think, going on.
Yeah, so, last week or the week before, we went through the whole corporate services department budget, as well as, recreation, library, daycare. We do have, those building costs, as well as crossing guards. Tomorrow we'll be going through physical services, the whole department, as well as, TPR. And Thursday afternoon, we'll be going through economic development, museum, and Heritage North. So that will round out all of our, budgets. The only one that I know we'll still be waiting on will be DSAB, because they don't pass their budget until March. So I'm wondering if you guys have had any preliminary budget discussions, what we should be thinking about, if there's an increase or none.
Well, if we continue to meter away at the reserves, then it'll be 0.
Okay,
If we decide to rebate significant portion of the reserves and let the budget just float, probably 1.8, I think, for Kirkland Lake, I think,
Okay.
something like that, or 1.7.
1.7.
do you know when they're gonna pass their budget?
I think we're passing it at the next meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, just
Mayor
further to
Tony?
what Todd's, is, even if DSAB came in at a 0%, we could see an increase because of the formulas that they use to calculate the appropriation out. And I know, when I was on DSAB, the last couple of terms, they came with a 0%, and that's what I had reported to. And I figure 0 is 0, but actually ours went up probably 35,000 because of the formulas and difference in assessment, difference in population. So a 0% at DSAB doesn't mean a 0% at the community.
Right.
Right, and that's why I corrected myself. 1.86 is the overall increase, and but again, we're trying to, we're having this argument or this discussion about 0% increase. So, but Tony's absolutely right. There will be variations between municipalities as to exactly what the numbers are, and I can share you
Sure.
share the preliminary
Perfect,
numbers with
thank
you,
you.
Jen.
So most of our preliminary budget discussions are fairly good at this point. Again, the increases that we'll talk about on the next one stem mainly from a fixed costs, right? Your utilities are the basic increase, our wonderful hydro and gas. Those are inevitable in order to run our facilities. So those are the types of increases that we're seeing in the budgets, as well as any negotiated union rate increases. And other than that, the directors are aware to bring their budgets in at the bare minimum. So really, those are the increases that we're seeing in the budgets to this point in time.
Okay. To continue on the fixed costs and discretionary spending, salaries and benefits, you move them into the discretionary costs, which it does make sense. We do have discretion, despite limited room on cost because of labor contract agreements, as well as legislated CPP, OAS, and EI costs. Our salaries amount to 12.8 per annum, including benefits, which is about almost half of our operational cost. Despite that, our total number of employees remain relatively the same for the past 2 years as far as numbers are concerned. So when an employee leaves, the position is reviewed for our needs and consideration. If some or all of the duties can be completed by existing employees, and we've looked at contracting wherever is feasible. I think we want to continue on that path. I think we've been diligent in keeping the staff numbers of where they're at. Our discretionary costs amount to almost 19,000, or 72% of the spending, but most of that 13 million is made up of salaries and benefits. I guess the other notable things, 2016, we did take a huge chunk at 900,000 in taxes. We did allocate 317,946 for reserves. There is some room on our discretionary spending. We've been looking at that, and as Jen said, so far what we looked at from the preliminary budgets that we were presented, they've been pretty well on track. So I think we're heading in the right direction. I threw in this tax comparison for the last 5 years, just to show you what that amounted to. And I thank Jen for also putting in the fact in showing the history of the tax assessment over that same period of time. So basically, taxes went up 37%, while municipal tax assessments went up 79%. So we haven't taken the full tilt of the assessment back in tax money. So by adjusting the tax rate as we have done, that's what we want to look at as I come in, discuss further. But I thought it would be just to give you a bit of a history of where we are and where we're going, or head look to be going. In our discussions, Jen, we looked at the 2017 assessment increases, and the actual tax levy, based on the same rate as 2016, would increase the tax levy by about 367,000 if the tax rate remained the same as it was in 2016, just for interest purposes. So it's not, the assessment didn't have that dramatic effect on this year's tax levy based on today's rate, 2016. It's obvious, you know, from looking at our tax comparisons, that we can't sustain these rates at a historical tax level increases that we've had. We hope through our discussion today to arrive at a consensus as to the direction council can give to staff for 2017 budget. In our preliminary discussions with Mayor Antoniazzi, Councillor Barker, and myself, we are recommending to see a zero increase-based budget approach from 2016 total budget. For example, deduct the sewage cost budget from the 2016 budget, as you mentioned, Mayor Tony, as the starting point. We have a number of saving components that staff have been working on, and we feel this objective is achievable. Some of these savings we can't, haven't actually been approved funding, so, or reduced costs, so we'll have to leave it at that. Councillor Barker, before we go to the general discussion, have you anything to add from the meetings we had?
Just commend our administration and staff for the being able to work with these tight budgets these last few years, and you know, moving forward, keeping the budgets real tight. It's not an easy task, but you are definitely excelling in that task, and hats off. Extreme diligence is being done with the taxpayers' dollars, and I'm very proud to be part of council in these decisions moving forward. So,
Thank you. I look to council members for your feedback on this proposal, or any concerns that you may have. So what we're saying basically is zero increase in taxes with an adjustment of the tax rate to offset the new assessment.
So,
We'll start with Councillor Roman.
Okay, I tend to agree with you and even think we could go a little further. Th- There's been some developments this year that have, we've seen some significant decreases, and there's a potential for more to come. The last few years, I know that even though we're working to reduce the tax rate, people's assessments have been climbing faster than we've been reducing the rate, and so people's taxes are still going up. And I would really like to see us working towards true tax relief this year, if at all possible. And not just sort of with respect to the transfer of the sanitary to the water bill, because to me, that's just a,
Solve.
yeah, I don't consider that tax relief, because call it what you want.
agree.
People are paying the same money.
Exactly.
I would really like to see true tax relief, where we're taking in less money than we have been. That we need to take in less money than we have been, and we can transfer that back to the taxpayer. I think it's possible this year, and I'd at least like for us to work towards that goal.
Well, there are some areas, as I mentioned, that there are going to be some significant savings. Unfortunately, they're not announced yet or officially approved.
Mhm.
We do know that with the daycare out of the picture,
Mhm.
there's at least a $70,000 savings right there. So,
And I've long been pushing for this transfer of sanitary costs to water bills, because there are opportunities now as well for additional tax revenues to come in, and I really think that should be a priority. I'm waiting to see a report from staff on this, but there's a real opportunity here now, and this is just one of a number of opportunities to bring our overall costs down. So I'm quite optimistic about this year's budget process.
I am too. I agree with you. There are some unusual opportunities that don't come along that often. We still have to factor in the labor contracts and whatnot. So it's going to eat up some of that, and I would like to see us meet Jen's suggestion of at least $370,000 put into working capital. So I think we have to tie that all in. But I hear you. Yep. Councillor Morgan?
Thanks, Chairman. I guess the problem for me is that, having harped about this almost every single year that I've sat at the council table, I kind of become lost in the process. But I've always been an advocate for trying to lower taxes in this community, because even from an economic development standpoint, it's a huge struggle when a business comes to Kirkland Lake and they look at what they're going to be paying. It's problematic, and it has been for a long time. I know what Oscar said in the KPMG report, but the reality is if you're building a new house in Kirkland Lake, the taxes are going to wallop you in the head, and we've got to rein that in. And I'm totally in favor of holding the line on our budget or reducing it. I mean, to me, that's an absolute no-brainer. I would love to be able to do that. And if this is the year we can take advantage, it helps us reset the clock, if you will, prior to, what may be coming down the pipe in dealing with, the cost of some of the projects that we're embarking on. Because I think, there's going to be some pain in those projects as they stand right now. So absolutely, if we can rein things in and if we can cut taxes, you know what? I will support it 100%. One thing that we have to be cautious about, though, and when we're, you know, whether we're tricking ourselves or whether we're tricking the public, and I don't know that Jen is able to decipher this or not, and this is certainly no reflection on you, Jen, but we have to be cautious about including new assessment with the increase in assessment. Because those are new tax dollars that are part of that equation, and we have to be cautious about not lumping them in with prior year's numbers. We have seen some significant construction in different pockets, whether it's the microtel or what have you. And all I'm saying is that, we need to be able to compare apples to apples. So as much as these numbers are somewhat alarming, we need to have a little bit better data before we can throw anybody under the bus for this. So I just want to caution everybody about that. So as far as what you're up to, I totally agree, and if we can cut it more, all the power to you.
Well, that's certainly the goal. I think from both Tom and I, from our aspect of what we've seen so far, we're on track. But the bigger budgets are coming through tomorrow and the next couple of days, so I think we'll have a better idea then as to what we can achieve. But that's certainly the goal. I agree with you totally. Mayor Antoniazzi?
Yeah, I have to agree with my two previous councillors who spoke. I think in the 13 years that I've been in council, working with council for the town, 2017 will be probably the first year that we really have an opportunity to reduce the tax rate here in Kirkland Lake, especially with some significant savings that should be identified. So I think it's really an opportunity for us to reduce our operating budget. And by reducing our operating budget, it means that we need less taxes to operate the town. And there hasn't been a year prior to this will give us that opportunity as 2017. Now, that being said, there's also the other side of the coin. There's also the tax levy side of what people are going to pay. And I look at different sectors that it's my understanding that MPAC have changed the method of calculation for large industrial companies throughout the province. And as a result, probably our biggest taxpayer may see a huge decrease in their levy. So while we're really, and it's also my understanding that the treasurers are working on that as well. So while we're really cutting back on our operating, there's things that are also out of our control, and that's the way we calculate taxes for large industrial companies. So I think that may prove to be an area of concern. I know at a recent discussion I had in Timmins, I was advised that Timmins would be looking at, with this new assessment of different industrial businesses, they're looking at about if everything stays the same, about a $3 million decrease in the taxes received from these companies. Ours would be significantly smaller because by size we're smaller, but it's still going to be significant. And I think we have to recognize that while operating is so important, it's also important as to what we have coming in. So if we gain a huge amount in our operating, we may lose a huge amount in our assessment, because some companies will be assessed less, while most complain that they're assessed too high. There's some companies that will be assessed less, and so I think we have to remember that. But that being said, what is in our control is the operating budget, And I believe there's some areas of significant change. And I believe that if we are ever going to give it back to the taxpayers, this year is 2017 is the time to do it.
I agree. I think, Mayor Antoniazzi, what the starting point should be zero-based, and what we can reduce from there. And maybe we can come to a bit of a consensus at the end, because we have to go back in discussions with the directors, with their budgets, that being the case. But I think those are fair comments, and this is the year that we have to do something major. But to cut 3%, you're talking a savings of maybe $350,000. So, I mean, to say cut 10% or something like that, it would be very significant. I doubt that it would be achievable without cutting a lot of services, or,
Well, I think just the fact that 2-point-something million, I'm talking just tax levy. I'm not talking the savings, the ultimate savings to taxpayers at the end. But just in our operating, we can really cut our tax rate because we won't have this sanitation expense.
Oh, I
And
agree.
So it's really an opportunity for us to get that down, but not at the expense of not knowing what could be happening with the revenue side of it as well.
yeah. Yeah, we have to factor that out. It's no longer in the levy. Jen, just to clarify, Councillor Morgan brought up the fact about the assessment with some of the newer properties that have come online. The figure where we come up with what the increased assessment would be would result in tax dollars based on today's tax rate. Did that include the microtol and any of the
Yeah.
properties?
Yeah, because it's based on our return roll that we receive from MPAC, and MPAC factors all the new construction properties in there.
So it's right up to date then?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Chamillard?
Yeah, Pat, and as it was mentioned a few times, well, there's a lot of stuff we talk about. It's a lot of bull crap because we talk about, oh, the tax rate has to be reduced. It's been reduced for the last 6 years. Every year we reduce it, but the tax is still going up because we don't reduce it enough. It's always been reduced every year, but the tax is going up because the assessment is going up. So we have to reduce this a lot more than we did. One thing I really, number that Tony talked about this, is tax levy. We were at 9.2, now we're at 11 million. So we went up almost 20% in 2 years. That should come down to, if you come over 9.5, I will not be happy. And that's just basically the sewer and a little bit more, a little bit less. If you come back at 10.5, whew, I would not vote for that. That number should be quite a bit lower. That's the number I care. I don't care about the rest. I don't care you tell me, oh, the tax went down 2%. The tax might went down 2%, but if their assessment went down 20%, their tax goes up. So what's important is, like Tony said, the tax levy has to go down, and has to go down to at least close to 2014. And at that time, we had no sewer in there, but that would be, because we have quite a few things that came to the year we talked, to this year. The OPP is lower, the assessment went up, what else we had, the sewer is out of there. So there's a lot of stuff that should come out of there, and we should see, there should be quite a bit lower. And I'm happy you said, well, at least your starting point seems to be about 9.8 million, because you said you'll take the
Just the-
sewer out, yeah.
Yep.
Hopefully it'll be lower than that. I think last year was not, we went up way too much, 1 million, but the other errors we did, and I was not happy about this, when we decided tax rate, instead of giving it to the homeowner, we gave it to the business people. Well, I hope this year we'll do the opposite. We'll give it a bit more to the ownership and less to the business. I mean, business pay too much tax, but the homeowners are getting killed from what I hear. And I know, because I pay tax too, and we all pay tax. And we know how much we pay, and we know how much it went up in the last, basically 3 years. We went up way too much. Basically, I know it's a lot of work for you guys, but I think there's, like Jim said, there's ways that we save money this year, and it should be reflected. If you come back and tell me, well, the tax rate is a bit lower, but they pay more tax, that's not reflected. Reflection should be on the tax bill. Is it lower or not? That's what I wanna know.
I agree with you, Council Chamillard. It's a net, what's coming out of your pocket, what you gotta pay. And, that's definitely what, we're gonna look at.
I don't know if Jen knows, Jen, we're at 26 million, for our budget, total budget?
That's just our net operating,
Yeah.
or sorry, expenses that
Yeah.
are operating.
Do we know how much the government gives us before, or do we start there, or?
Like our OMPF?
Yeah, and all this?
Our OMPF has gone down $12,000 this year, so we're only getting 6.224.
Okay.
But you mean from other
Yeah, there's other
operating
ones, yeah,
grants?
yeah.
Oh, well, we get the museum operating grant, a library operating grant, we get small funding.
So when we do our
Employment grants
budget,
here and there.
we don't know that.
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
we
we know
factor
this?
those in,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, that's hard to know too. Because really, people have to realize, sure, they pay 11 million, but our total budget is 26 point something million. So they also get, we pay a lot of tax, but we get a pretty good value too. Because I hear people, I don't get nothing. Well, the 26 million is spent in town somewhere. It's not spent at my house or your house. Taxpayer gets something back. Maybe it's not what they want, but they get something back. And this year was $26.2 million that was spent in town. Do they pay too much? I think they do, but that's another problem.
Thank you. Councilor Barker?
I agree with everything going around. I've always been an advocate for ensuring that economic development is taken care of, because it's one of the only ways the town can make money outside of the tax levies through economic development. So I just want to make sure that we, have that insight as well, making sure that we don't sell ourselves short with economic development and any opportunities there, making sure Wilf has all the resources he needs for that department to ensure that we can move forward. If there is a business that comes knocking on our door, or an industry that comes knocking on our door, that we're ready to welcome them with open arms. I've heard personally of a couple stories where people have left town because they didn't feel welcome. I hate seeing that because these people were good residents of Kirkland Lake. One was my neighbor. Mind you, we couldn't offer what North Bay had offered him, from airport space to 3D printing and all kinds of stuff like that. But it's hard to lose these innovative minds because innovation is a huge aspect to industrial growth and development. So I think that as long as we're keeping that in the back of our minds and not short selling our economic development department, I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, Tom, just if I may comment on that, I'll be back to you shortly, Tony. Last year, we had suggested putting in $20,000 towards, for economic development for road shows or whatever to attend to, and it kind of got lost by the wayside. Those things are hard to measure. You show up, you talk to a lot of people, but it's something that develops over a couple of years in most cases. So I think we have to look a little bit outside the box. It might seem like wasted money, but it's not. Your payback comes down the road, but it's hard to measure immediately. So I agree with you in that aspect. So I hear what you're saying, and Tom does as well. So when we go back to the directors, like, we almost have to come up with some either dollar amount or percentage that you're looking to cut, a goal at least, as coming down from that 0% base budget. I don't know, I look around, I read a lot of the newspapers in the north, like Sudbury, North Bay, Timmins. Most of them have increased taxation in about 3.5% for this year's budget. Like, everybody's in a different situation. They have bigger expenses, bigger budgets to go with it. But I think we're making headway, but the starting point at 0. But in order for us to really put something together or to give that message back to the directors, what do you want to see? A 3% cut, which is maybe $350,000? I just can't go back and say cut. Well, what do you cut? Unless you come up with a goal or an objective, I don't think you're gonna get it. Sorry.
I think a 0% is fair. There are inflationary costs that each department has to deal with.
Yep.
So to ask for any more, I think we're not gonna make real progress on the nickel and dime stuff. It's the bigger, the service review and that type of thing. That's where the savings are coming from.
Yep.
By going to each department with a 0, though, I would hope, or not hope, I would expect that any of these things are pulled out and you're starting from a new baseline. Like daycare, for example, okay, you go to them and say 0%, well, that's 0% after you've taken out
taken
the
it out.
cost of the daycare, you know what I mean? But I think a 0% approach, at least initially, would be reasonable to ask.
Yeah, okay, we'll go around.
Two things. One, and I don't mean to contradict you, Pat. When we look at other municipalities, I think we've got to be careful not to get drawn in by, and this kind of pivots off of my question earlier. Most municipalities that are vibrant and building, they could have a 0% increase in their tax rate in perpetuity. I mean, they increase their revenues by having new assessment added to their roll constantly. We don't have that luxury. We do on occasion, and that's what, you know, we need to be aware of. But I think we've got to really look only at Kirkland Lake's situation and not be listening to the noise that's happening in other municipalities. Going back to, I think, the crux of the question that we're being asked at this moment, I would like to see, certainly starting at a 0%, but I would like to see some options for further reductions, like what it would look like. Maybe a 3% you could set the mark at. What would a 3% reduction look like, you know, in the various departments? And let us make that decision. I mean, you know, I'm not asking staff to slash and burn. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, and I've said this before, I think that's our role here, is to decide, you know, ultimately where services or where cuts need to happen. I happen to think that this year we could make some reductions without a lot of pain, because we are doing service assessments. We did do the KPMG thing. We have identified significant savings. We've already acted on several of them. So I think, you know, as Tony alluded to and what I said earlier, I mean, if there's a year to do it, it's this year to hit the reset button, because we've got to throttle back and prepare for, you know, the impact of these coming projects. And this is definitely the year to do it.
I agree.
Echo what I said last time, but, you know, I think for sure we have to give back the increase in assessment. We have to give that back. I think we have to give a start at 0 operating, and as Jim alluded to, it has to be a 0 after we've taken out the saving. So it's, I mean, it would be easy to say 0, like you said, at daycare when we don't have a daycare anymore, but so, you know, we have to look at what savings staff have identified and make sure those savings go towards reduce tax rate. But I think the one factor that hasn't been discussed, and I think it's a factor that ties the hands of where you can reduce, is the tax ratios. And you know, we just can't say, well, we want it all to go to the residential, or we can't say we want it to go, you know, there's certain tax ratios that we're bound by act, I guess. So where we may want to give, where our savings is on the overall budget, we're sort of bound by where how these savings are going to be allotted out to each tax sector. And while we might see a good savings with the residential possibility, the result of all those cost-cutting, a bigger portion or a huge portion may go to pipelines, where we're not as gung-ho to reduce. But in order that each tax sector is protected so that communities just don't ram it down the throat of the big industrials, there's tax ratios, and I think that bounds the hands of Treasury as to where we can. I guess there's some can manipulate a little bit, but it's, I think that's a factor that, you know, we may have really reduced the operating budget in dollars, but the savings may not go to where we entirely would like to see them go. So I don't know if Jen can talk further on that, but yeah, sure.
Well, I mean, you alluded to the fact that we're in the first year of our 4-year phase-in again, so, and we did get our return rolled back. We will be seeing increases in the residential assessment, but in the industrial classes, there are extremely large decreases that we need to come up with ways to mitigate that tax effect from the industrial saving it and maybe try and pass on something to the residents. So we have been looking at different ways to address this problem. There's graduated tax rates that we're going to look into. Again, the revenue neutral ratios are available from Opta as a tool all the time. So once we come up with what our final operating budget is, it'll give me a greater idea of where and how these increases and decreases can be passed on to which class, because we are restricted by the different ratios.
You're right, Jen, the real challenge is working within those tax ratios, and it's not easy. You can't, as Tony said, you can't just load out on one particular sector and have them pay the price. So, yeah, go ahead.
Jen, Tony mentioned earlier about this new formula for industrial. Is that already baked into the numbers you've got, or?
There's no new formula. It was just a reassessment. It was called the Special Business Purpose Review of all these larger industrial properties,
but
and
we
it
know
is factored into the new assessments.
So we know what that is already?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so that's not something that's gonna
Oh,
surprise us
no, it's not something that's gonna
mid-year.
surprise us. It's just now
Okay.
we need to deal with it, and I
Okay.
need to
Yeah.
figure out how to
Okay. so
translate that into a good tax
Another
number.
wrinkle, but it's something we can deal with
Mhm.
now. Okay.
Constable, or Councillor Shamir.
Constable. Pat, coming back again, the same thing I just said earlier. We had a 0% the last 2 years, basically. We had a tax rate lowered, but our tax levy went up $2 million. That's the numbers we want to see down. You could tell me 3% lower, but if the tax levy goes to 13 million next year, it's not going down, it's going up. So that number for me, you want a number, I'll give you one. I would like to see about 9 million next year. That's what I would like to see for tax levy. So that would be, you already got 1.2, so that would be 800,000 saving that we got. I don't think it's that hard to do if we get the 0%, because we pretty much, Jim, I think we should have close to 800,000 to $1 million saving. OPP was a big amount of money. Daycare, and it's another 60,000 or something it was, I think, Joanne. Anyway, it's all there. That would be my goal if I would be in your shoe. And you told me, well, you're at least aiming at 9.8. That's not bad, but I would go to 9. That's what I would like to see. I think if you keep everything at 0%, with the new assessment we have in town also, from the, like Todd said, every year, that number has to be decreased lower, and then we'll see tax cut. But if you just say 0%, taxes are not getting cut because the assessment goes up.
No, just to
Well, but I
clarify.
know what you mean, yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying, if we said 0%, you lower the tax rate to make up for the assessment, the increased assessment, to get to zero increase. You have to go back, you're right, you have to go back to deduct the sewers charge and then start from there.
Yeah, so,
And
so my goal for 2017 will be around 9 million. That's what I would, that's a number. Percentage is like hard to quantify because some goes up, some goes down, and at the end of the day, they pay more tax.
yeah, but for us to go back to discuss with the directors, we need, I can't just say X number of dollars in each department. It's,
No, you could go 0%, because I think with the saving we already have built in there, and the sewer taking out, I think you should be at 9 million. But if you come back at 10 million,
well, that'll be the goal.
yeah, that's a goal. You ask me for a goal, that would be my goal. I need, lower even would be better, but start with 9.
I echo everyone else, taking notes. I echo everyone else's, considerations, and, I'm like Junkie, I like looking at numbers at the end of the, percentages are great, but at the end of the day, so once we get the raw numbers from
Show me
everyone
the
else, we'll
money.
be able to compare it, that's exactly it, compare the actual dollar figures to our savings and be able to calculate from there what percentage, you know, but, no, it's, hear everyone loud and clear, and we're on the same page.
So, Tom, you're satisfied with the direction that we're receiving from council tonight? I am. I hear you. Any further discussion or comments? I will say, I think, as council as a whole, we've had a lot more discussion this year than we've ever had, and involvement of council, and I appreciate that, and Tom does as well, because it's a difficult process, it's not easy, but we'll get there. This is the year to make it happen. So, thanks for your input. And have a motion to adjourn.
It's moved by Counselor Barker, seconded by Counselor Morgan. The council adjourned its finance meeting of January 24th, 2017 to an in-camera meeting to discuss 2 property issues.